Hello and well met. This is Labron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to be going over some content that I had started yesterday. We'll start with a little bit of a recap. So what we had done yesterday is we set up the desktop and we created our own NPCs. We kind of have a map here now. I got some notes for running this encounter, and also including the context of the Sirenscape sounds, which can be incorporated with Fantasy Grounds if you have a subscription or a super subscription to the Sirenscape web player and the content, and then also the Fantasy Grounds platform. So this kind of implies that you have both of those. If you don't, you can skip the audio part. So essentially, in order to get this to work, you need to log into your Sirenscape account. So I've already done that. I have a subscription. This is a super subscription that is going to be used during this tutorial here. And I do have volume control here, those sort of things. You can also control this in Fantasy Grounds, but I'm just kind of showing you the preliminary setup. The next thing is if you are already in a campaign, so in other words, you have a different GM or you're in several campaigns, sometimes you have to actually exit that campaign from the back end. So if I go into this Fantasy Grounds under settings, and then you go into your invite and those sort of things, if you go to the actual session that you're in, that will allow you to leave the session so that you can join a different session. So that's something that comes up occasionally if you're a player who's in multiple games and you have several game masters that are using Sirenscape. There is a potential that you might be joining an older session. So that's something that may happen. Once the GM has this set up, you have to have this authorization, which is a code that you can get on your account page in Sirenscape. And then you're going to do the web import, which is going to import all the links to the content that you owned. And if you have a super subscription, you'll have pretty much everything. And then you will generate a session URL, which is going to invite the players. So you have the invite and you have the generate. So you're going to generate your invite and it's going to pop up and say, do you want to allow us to do this? So this is the authorization token. So you can say yes. And then you would click on invite, which is going to provide a link for your players. So if I click on this session control here, it's going to open up my actual account, and you got to be logged in, of course. And this is where the audio is going to play for myself as the host. Now, when the players join, it's going to look a little bit different. So when they click on the link in the chat, it's going to bring this up, and it'll be just this basic web player that they can use to listen and monitor the audio. They also have control of this. They can close it if they want. If they don't care about the audio, they can turn the volume down, however they want to do it, but it has to run minimized in the background. So I'll go ahead and close that because that's the actual player side of this. So I'm going to minimize this. And once you have this stuff set up, if you subscribe to Fantasy Grounds or you have a full license, you'll be able to purchase packs on the web store. So in other words, I have some modules, and down here are some Sirenscape modules. So I have one for the Curse of Strahd for Sirenscape. I probably won't need that because I'm not running that adventure right now. But I do have the Sirenscape sounds for the monster manual, which is most of the main creatures. And then I have the D&D Player's Handbook, Weapons and Spells, which is going to give you the sound effects if you have players attached to your game and they're going to be using their weapons and such in their attacks. Okay, so that is part of the audio part of this. And then the other part of it is the context menu. So this comes up when you bring up an item or something that is part of the adventure. So there's a context and there's a trigger. So triggers are basically set up around the actions of an NPC or a player. The context menus are set up, or the context or content is set up around images. So when you open up an image, it's going to bring the links up in the context menu so that you can trigger them. So you can set those up yourself under sound sets. And these are all the predetermined ones that come with those modules, but you can make your own. and you can set up your own triggers and those sort of things. But these are kind of set up for you, so it's a little bit easier and less time consuming. And that's all those packs do. They just set the links up. They don't actually give you any sounds. They don't really give you anything other than the ability to call up those sounds when necessary. So it could have something to do with opening an image, or it could be something to do with a trigger. Now, the content stuff still makes it to where you have to actually click on the audio to trigger it. So it's kind of like an evolving soundboard that evolves and changes as you access content in Fantasy Grounds. That's the best way I can describe it. So, for example, in this particular setup, if you watched video number 1, I actually went through a lot of this. And what I've done here is I've linked basically the encounter to the map. I've also linked a rotating blade trap that's basically going to be part of the scenario here in case the combatants get too close to the center. I added a little bit of animation after the first video, so there was an animation asset that I had from the Fantasy Grounds art subscription. It was essentially an animated swirling kind of fog, so I kind of did that just to kind of give this some movement. And then there's some dust. It's really hard to see, but there's dust on here that's kind of floating around. So this is the battle arena. And what I had done prior to this is I had an encounter that I was going to link to this actual area. So when I go to my notes, which is my story entry here, there is an encounter that I have set up already. You can actually link this to the map as well. So I'll drag and drop this onto the map. So when I get ready to start this encounter, everything's ready to go. And I have kind of like this cheat list here of all the stuff that I want in this game. So if I close all this stuff accidentally, or maybe I'm just kind of starting, I can click on a lot of these links here that I put in my notes, and it'll bring all that stuff back up. So if I click on the sound context window, that comes up. There's the combat tracker. Here's the image for the battle scene. And then here's the actual encounter. And then for the NPCs, I can pop those up because I already have those kind of ready to go for this scenario. And what you want to do is resize the windows as you need them. So in this case, I'll go and fix these because I had them set a certain way, but I moved some stuff around. So you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're doing this sort of thing. And this really helps with the clutter and with keeping your tabletop clean, and so you can see everything. You don't have everything stacked on each other. So these two are stacked because that's the way I want them to be. And then your sound context is down here. So if you notice, before it was blank, and now that I've interacted with these NPCs, now it's bringing up the audio that's associated with that type of NPC. So these are all the default ones. And it's probably keyed off the word vampire. And this other one is werewolf, because that's what I have, is a werewolf and a vampire. So that is something that you will probably come across when you're using Syrinscape. So this still does require you to trigger these manually in some cases, depending on what it's keyed to. So some of these are triggers, some of these are one-shot, some of them are sound effects. So you'll have to kind of DJ this as you go through the combat. And you kind of leave this window open so that you're able to access the links. And you have a play button, you have the stop, you have the volume, and you have the one-shot volume, which are the kind of like the sound effects. So those are optional. This is something that will add to your complexity of your campaign. So if you're not careful, you can really make things too crazy for yourself. But nonetheless, when you access stuff that is keyed to the module or to the player's handbook or the monster manual, it'll bring up these sound context links based off of the modules that are loaded. So in this case, in here, I showed you earlier that I have the Syrinscape modules. That's where all that stuff comes from. And then you can find those in the actual sound sets. This is all the individual sounds that are mapped to either an image, or they're mapped to a text field or a text trigger in the combat tracker. So that's kind of how these work. You can make your own too. I'm not going to go into a tutorial about setting all that up, but there is a way that you can do that. And that is what most people end up doing if they're doing homebrew or a rule set that's not specifically has content created for it. So those sound context menu are really time consuming, and I think they charge you like $10 for each one of those. and it's essentially very tedious. You go through every single thing and you add a link to it. So if I open up this is just an approaching the den sound. It's a mood sound for the werewolf den. So then you can designate what type. Is it context menu? Is it, there's all kinds of different settings that you can use on sound sets. So I just kind of wanted to cover that a little bit so you can kind of understand what goes into this and the potential work that might be cut out for you. So if you have a rule set or a module or some sort of scenario where they don't have the context menu set up for it, you have to make them yourself. And that's really how this whole thing started, is you used to have to build all those links yourself. I still like that over having them done for me because, one, it gives me the connection between the audio and my game, and it lets me customize it the way I want. And sometimes these context menus don't match what's going on in the game. So sometimes the adventure runs differently, and a lot of these are keyed around the adventure, but if you don't run the adventure as written, some of those context menu things don't make any sense. So you have to kind of pick and choose which makes more sense to you for your game and which ones don't. So this is just a kind of a preliminary. So what I have here are two combatants. I have a powerful werewolf and a powerful vampire. So we're just going to call them Nosferatu and Loup Garou, which is the werewolf. So if I open up this combat encounter, you can see I have these two guys here. They're both already placed. So that means I took the time to drag the tokens on the map where I want them to start. Also over here on the right, these are factions. So for the werewolf, I can change his faction to neutral, let's say, and then this guy would be an enemy. So I'm just kind of doing that to differentiate between the two because they are going to be fighting each other. They're not both enemies, or they're not both hostile towards the party. There's no adventures in this. This is all going to be NPC versus NPC. So first things first is you might start off with some mood music. So some of the stuff here may not make sense, but I'll go ahead and we'll use some kind of this battle music maybe, or maybe we'll find something in the library that already kind of makes more sense. You can do that, or you can just wait until the combat starts and trigger the stuff as needed. So what I'm going to do first is set the encounter up. So the encounter is ready to go. All I have to do now is, since they're on the map already, or they're set up around there, and they're all placed and such, I'm going to go ahead and hit the down arrow, and that adds them to the combat tracker. And on the map itself, they're on the map, but they are grayed out for players. So since I don't have any players, I'm not really running an adventure. On the top left corner, I'm going to click on Show All NPCs, but you could show them individually by clicking next to their record, next to the link for their title, and that will make them show up on the battle map. So now that I have the vampire claimed, this is what he sees on the battle map, and I'm going to go ahead and lock these, and I'm going to close or lock this so that we can see the full battlefield. We don't need all those settings on. We went over that in the first video, and then I'm going to go ahead and maximize this so that we have a better view. And then as you claim tokens, it changes the vision of which token you're looking through. So they both have dark vision and they both have regeneration. So this would be a rather long slugfest because they both have a ton of hit points and they have their attacks and all their special abilities. So we're going to go through some of this. We're not going to do the whole battle. I think it'll be very long and drawn out, but we'll see how it goes. So first things first is I'm going to reset the rounds here. So I want to go back to 0. And we're going to go to menu, rest. So I'm just going to give them a long rest just in case I used anything during testing. So everything's kind of reset back to 0. Here's round 1, and these are basically the combatants. So I'm going to roll initiative just from the get-go, just so I have to set that up. You can set up different things in the settings depending on what you want, but you can change the diagonal movement, like if that counts every other square. You can set up, like when you add the combatants to the combat tracker, like in this case, these guys both started with maximum hit points, and then you can change that, and then you can also change whether they both go on the same initiative or not. So you can go into the settings and you can actually set this stuff up. So I actually changed the color of my pointer to red. So if I want to draw something, I'm going to use both mouse buttons, hold those down and drag, and that will give me a pointer so I can point things out. So right over here is the hazard, which is an NPC stat block that I created for this particular session. If you want to get rid of the pointer, you can right click, go to pointers, and then you would say remove pointers, and that will remove them. So that's a way that you can draw things out. The next thing is that as you access these characters, like when you click on them, it will change these context menus depending on how it's set up in Fantasy Grounds and in Sirenscape. So as you click these, it will potentially change these context menus. And if they're on the combat tracker, that also triggers them. So if you have both these creatures on, you're going to have both the sound context menu. If I remove one of the creatures, it might remove the context menu temporarily until I put it back on. So this is an evolving door of sounds, the context sounds. If you want your own and you don't, you want them more static, you can link your own links to the map, and then when you use this map, it'll bring up the context menu, and then you already have your custom ones that you can trigger yourself. So it's kind of up to you. So I'll leave this open just for the interim so that I have access to it, and when I need to use it, I'll use it. So this thing here is I have the NPC stat block laid out. So if I click on these links on the right, it's going to bring up the stat blocks, and I want to layer them so that when I'm using them, they're not going to cover everything else. So when I click on these links, I want these to actually pop up where I want them to go, not just any random place. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. I'm going to open this up. That's exactly where I want this to be. Same thing with this werewolf, same difference. So this is going to give me access to these when I need it. I also have this hazard that doesn't necessarily have to be on the combat tracker, but I can access the stat block and use the attacks and the damage on here if anyone enters this area. And then I have the notes and such for this particular trap. So when they get within 5 feet, I need to remember that I'm going to pop that up, and it will say the rotating blades are powerful. They're powered by a shaft mechanism that's operating continuously in a specific area, which is underneath the arena. There's some mules and an engineer down there operating the gears to turn the shaft. The trigger proximity, so when someone steps around, like these squares around here, it'll activate the blades to turn. They're sharpened like big rusty blades. They stand about 1.5 feet off the ground. And to detect this, it would only take a wisdom check of 15 or higher. So that would be initially. If you just got on the field, you're assessing this, you'll realize that this is a big trap. It already looks lethal, so I'm pretty sure people would understand. But if you make that check, you'll kind of understand how it works more, and you'll know right away to avoid it. The next one is disabling. So if you have the time and you are concerned about your allies, or maybe you're fighting in a group, someone can go over there and disable it. So they have to use a DC 15 intelligence or investigation check, and or a DC 15 dexterity check using thieves tools and such to disable it. If you destroy it, it will permanently disable the hazard. So it just depends on what happens in the game. And then there's the slicing strike. So it does have this slicing strike. The DM can decide how many attacks it's going to make, but at least 2. So you get hit with the initial one, and then the second one comes through, and that's when you're given a chance to get out of it. So it kind of depends on the situational. That's why I only left it like that, because it does quite a bit of damage. The first couple blades might take you out. It does 22 average damage, so that's pretty lethal. So that could be a thing where you push another player into it or something like that. All right, so then on top of that, this arena also has glass around here, so the players won't necessarily see that, but when I highlight over that, all that is just giving me the ability to open and close. And what this does is it blocks the players from moving through here. so they won't be able to leave the arena. In this case, I don't have to worry about it because I'm actually controlling both NPCs. This is not a traditional game. This is more of a combat werewolf versus vampire type scenario. So let's get started. So both the combatants are ready, and I need to roll initiative. So generally speaking, when you add an NPC to the combat tracker, it'll automatically roll their initiative. So there is a setting where you can change how that behaves. So what'll happen is if it says combat auto NPC initiative, if that's set to group, all the bad guys will go on the same initiative. If you want to turn that off and do it manually each time, you can. Or if you turn it on, Fantasy Grounds will roll, but it will roll for each individual combatant. So that's what I have it set to right now. And then once that does that, I can go to menu and go to initiative, and then I'm just going to roll for all the NPCs because I don't have any players. So, and now that I've done that, the werewolf is going to go first. So with that in mind, if I bring up the context menu that I had set earlier, this will basically give me that ability to trigger any audio that I want. So if I go to the sound context menu, kind of bring this where I can access it, I'm going to go with the battle music for the actual werewolf. So when I bring this up, technically it should bring up the sound context. And then I have to activate the web audio as a permission. So what's it doing here? Yeah, it's acting goofy. It's probably a security browser thing. Yeah, we'll see what happens here. There it goes. So once in a while you have to check that because it could cause problems when you're initially activating it. But now that it's activated, I'm going to actually turn this down a little bit so it doesn't cover my voice too much. But this is giving us the audio that we're going to need if we want to have this context menu playing and running in the background. So this will play continuously because it is music. So if you want to turn it off, you can actually hit the stop button and it will fade out, which is kind of cool. If you're using a different kind of web player or something that's not as integrated, it'll just abruptly cut it. That's one reason I do like Syrinscape. A lot of people don't like paying the subscription and such, but it allows you to play more than one sound. They fade in and out, so it's a lot smoother than just having a regular trigger, which is abrupt. Unless you create those fades yourself with your audio file, it's going to be really abrupt. And I think in that case, if I had external audio and I didn't want to use Syrinscape or pay for it, then I would just probably have some ambient music that just played in the background continuously. And then your players can decide if they want to turn off or on the audio, provided that you've piped it to them. That's another issue. But anyway, so the battle music for that guy is going to go on here. You can turn down the global, turn this off, or turn it down quite a bit so it's not too loud. And then we'll see what he does for his first turn. So my ruling here is that each of these NPCs have one opportunity to change their form. So if the werewolf wants, right now he's in the hybrid form or the humanoid form. If he changes into a wolf, that's his one time. And they can't keep going back and forth. I mean, he can die and end up, going back to his normal form. But in this case, and they can't leave the arena. So if the vampire turns into a bat and flies away, the match is over. So that's kind of how I have this set up. And they don't have any melee weapons, so they're just going to be using their claws and their teeth. And neither of them have any spells, so it's pretty straightforward. Not a whole lot of different things. So this guy has a bite, claw, legendary resistance, a swipe attack, a mauling pounce, and another additional bite if he uses his lair actions or his legendary actions. So these are just some things that they have and the vampire has something similar. So I'm going to actually move him closer to the vampire. So he's snarling and he's getting all uppity. So I want to go ahead and trigger the werewolf howl. So I might do that during gameplay just to kind of give more context to the encounter and make it sound kind of cool for the players and kind of give people a chance to enjoy the ambiance. And then there's also a werewolf battle music that I might play during the encounter. So this would kind of give that mood like a battle music. So I'm going to click on his token. And according to this, he can move 30 feet or 40 feet in hybrid mode. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key as the Game Master, and I'm going to move the token. So as I move the token, it'll keep track of how far I moved. So he's going to move out here, and notice he's not running around the edge. He's going to kind of stay in the middle somewhat. So he's kind of a direct kind of attack, not very much tactics going on here. So that's his move. From this area, unless he shape changes or something, he really can't do much. I could have elected to do a double move, like basically, since he can't really attack, I can say he's dashing. So I will go ahead and move again, another 30 feet. So he wants to get as close as he can to the vampire. So he just dashed his full movement, and that's basically the end of his turn. So now I'm going to click on the vampire and then use the combat tracker to advance the turn. So turn complete, or in this case, next actor. So now it highlights over here to the vampire. So the vampires are a little bit more, I wouldn't say overly intelligent, but they are pretty smart. So I did a little research on what these particular strengths and weaknesses are for each one of these combatants. So it's kind of important to know what they can do, and it's helpful before an encounter to do a little research. So I went online, and what I did is I took the information from Keith Amon's The Monsters Know What They're Doing. I also went into some forums and did some reading on how people run these things. And then I also have former experience to draw upon as to how or what you might do to make this combat more fun and a little bit more tactical and a little bit more useful. So as a game master, you may not have ever ran a vampire, so it's good to do a little bit of research on a complicated creature like this. So in this case, in a find area, in this arena setting, he's going to face off against a werewolf. So the vampire's usual tactics have to be adapted to this scenario. So here's maybe an approach that you might use. So he's going to check out the environment, so that's his first step. So I might have him roll a perception check, and maybe he'll notice the trap. And then, or he'll notice the hazard. He's going to leverage the mobility. So he has super speed and agility, so he can stay out of the werewolf's reach. And he might use his shape-changing ability for a quick repositioning if needed, but I only give them one chance. They can only turn back and forth once. Charm and deception. So if the rules and the context allow it, the vampire may try to charm the werewolf or deceive it into, going into something, or maybe he's going to lead him on, kind of distract him, that sort of thing. Charm and deception is something that may be difficult to achieve with a werewolf. Strategic entanglement. So he might engage in hit-and-run tactics, avoiding the werewolf's powerful close-range attacks, focusing on wearing the werewolf down rather than a direct confrontation. So if he has things to throw at him, or kind of running around and trying to resist his attacks and such. You can use abilities. So within the rules of the arena, the vampire should use its regeneration and any other permitted abilities to its advantage, recovering from hits when possible and exploiting any weaknesses in the werewolf's defenses. So he's going to be doing a lot of hit and run and kind of running away because he doesn't want to get too close, and that's really the big thing. He's going to keep an eye on things, and he'll retreat if he gets too low. And especially if he took any radiant damage, but in this case he probably won't. And then there might be some area-specific hazards that he needs to watch out, like that rotating blade in the center. And then, of course, sunlight and holy water are something that may neutralize him. So that's not going to be the case. This battle is happening at night unless someone uses magic. In this case, they both don't have any direct spells. So I'm going to have him roll a check here. So I'm going to bring up his stat block. And he does have perception of 7. So I would probably roll this in the dice tower if there was anyone connected, but in this case I'm just going to be rolling it for myself. So that's a total of 16, so that beats the 15 requirement. So he takes note of this rotating hazard, and he's going to make his move. So I think what he'll do is he's going to probably move away. And then what he can do is he can try to lure the werewolf into this area. So I think he's going to kind of just run around and around the periphery here and try to avoid him. So I'll have him also do a dash action so that he doesn't get caught out. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Alt key. So that's essentially his move. He can end up in this square, actually. So I will take that and go ahead and approve it. So that's his move. He's staying along the edge here, if you noticed. And he is going to assess the situation. He does have Misty Escape and Regeneration and Spider Climb. So he does have quite a few things at his disposal. So what I might do is wait for this guy. If he gets too close, he might employ those. So there might be 2 or 3 rounds where these guys are running away from each other. You know, that can be very boring for this video. So I think for now he's just gonna run through here. But his tactic is going to be to lure the werewolf into going into this swirling thing. That's what he learned when he took that assessment. So that's his turn. So I'm going to go back to the werewolf. So the werewolf sees the move. He's distracted by the movement. He sees the vampire moving away from him. So he's going to take a beeline and use his full dash movement to get closer. So again, I can just see him kind of running kind of like on his haunches, or kind of using his hands to move like a werewolf. So he does get close enough to engage the vampire, but he can't attack this round. So I'm going to move him close, and that's his turn, basically. So he can't really do much other than set himself up for the next round. So that's basically what he did. He moved close. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have the vampire probably use his Misty Escape. So we'll see what happens. So with this turn, I'm going to go ahead and advance it on the combat tracker. And now I want to take a look at his Misty Escape. So it says it transforms into mist instead of falling unconscious. Oh, that's when he gets to 0, so never mind. So what I might have him do is let's just try an attack. So he maybe to defend himself, he's going to strike this guy and see what he can do to him. So I'm going to take this attack roll. Normally we'd probably just take off, or maybe he'll try to charm him. Let's do that. So he holds his hands out like, whoa, or he does it in peace, like he's kind of like acting like he's going to be friendly. And he's like, I mean you no harm. So let's go to the, let's go over here to this context menu. Maybe we'll change up the sound. Maybe we will, we'll use the context menu for the vampire and get rid of the werewolf's, movement here, and maybe just get into the vampire attack sound. So you can do that. You can re-trigger sounds as the NPCs come into view. So there's a mood that's playing for the vampire attack. So he kind of looks up and he's like, I don't wish to combat you. He says it in tries to reason with this werewolf. Kind of hard to do, but we're going to go ahead and roll the saving throw versus charm. So it's save versus wisdom 17. So I'm going to drag and drop that onto the werewolf. I don't think he's immune to charm. I have to take a look at that. Damage resistances. So before I roll this, let me take a look at that. So I want to make sure I'm doing this in such a way. So looking at his stat block, yeah, so he's immune to being charmed. So that's not going to do any good. So that's what I'm saying. You kind of have to know these things when you're going into battle. So maybe he tries to charm the guy and doesn't realize that it's, initially that it doesn't work. So he starts to think of a way to get out of the situation, like, try to charm this guy, but he kind of thinks maybe against that. And I'm not saying he's going to lose his whole turn, but in this case, I think what he'll do is he'll do an attack, and he gets a multi-attack. So he gets at least 2 attacks, and only one can be a bite. So what I'm going to have him do is do a unarmed strike, drag and drop that, and if you have the context menu enabled, you'll hear the sound. So that scored a hit. So he comes out with his claws and he slashes the werewolf, and then it does 1d8 plus 4 bludgeoning. So if I do that, it should give you the sounds of the damage, provided that it's set up correctly. And then what will happen is this will be something that will trigger a sound if it's set up correctly. So that is just something you'll have to do. So, but I didn't mean to drag this one. So this unarmed strike, this bludgeoning damage, may be something that I messed up. I didn't do it right. But now for the bite attack. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And this time it was also a hit. So he reached out, tried to like slash him, and it just kind of, it grazed him. It didn't do much damage or anything to him. So it was light damage. And if you look here, it's not really going to do much for 240 hit points. And he'll regenerate too. So that's something you have to keep in mind with these type of creatures, is that regeneration can be brutal. So now that he's attacked him, kind of grabbed him with his claws, now he's going to do his bite, which does necrotic damage also. So we'll see what happens. So I'm going to drag and drop that. So that does that. And if you have something key to that, this vampire attack, you hit that, it will play that sound if it's associated with it. And let me see if that's a mood also. So let me bring up this context menu. Okay, so that's the vampire's turn. And then if you want to advance and go to the next turn, you hit this down arrow, and that will go to the werewolf. So from the werewolf now, I can bring up the context sounds for the werewolf, and then go to the battle music for the werewolf, and then turn off the vampire one. And we'll do that. So now that we have this one, let's see, Blood Frenzy. The Loup Garou has advantage on attack rolls against a creature that doesn't have all its hit points. So that's not a thing. But it has a multi-attack. So it gets 2 attacks, or one with its bite and one with its claw. So it's going to basically exchange attacks. So its first attack is its claws. So we'll do that. And he missed. So the vampire ducked. So now he's going to try to do a snarling bite. Oops. So we need to do the bite attack. And that hit. And now he basically grabs him and like tries to take a bite out of his arm. And then we'll do the damage part. So, let's see. Slashing. So he partially resisted that. And now there's a strength check to be made to see if he grapples him, like basically knocks him prone. So he succeeded. So that basically the vampire succeeded. So he didn't fall or lose his balance. So that's the end of his turn. So they are exchanging damage here and there. So this might go on for quite a while, especially if they don't move. So right now, if he moves out of here, out of this threat range, that'll open up an attack for the werewolf, a free attack essentially. However, he does have a movement thing where basically he can move up to its speed without provoking opportunity attacks. So he could use one of his legendary attacks. Or legendary actions. So he's got 3. So he might use that to get out of a bind. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and use one of his legendaries. and just move him out of there. So hold down the control or the alt key, move him here, and then move him away towards this. So he's going to move away and try to get out of that situation. So that's his turn. So that I'm going to end it, and now it's going to go to the werewolf. So the werewolf sees him taking off, so he's going to pursue him, obviously. So again, I'm going to go to the alt key and hold that down initially, and then bring him closer. So he's actually going to go here, trying to head him off at the pass. And then maybe he moves 5 more feet because that's 30. And now he's going to make his move. So he didn't move away, he's still in the same area. So again, I'm going to do the attack roll. Here's the bite. And again, let's see, he's going to do the claw attack. And this, he's having a hard time using his claws against the vampire. Vampire's pretty tough. So now he's going to try his bite attack. So he does a snarling, snapping bite at him. And again, he missed on both of those. What a crazy thing. So what I might do is bring the vampire over here on his turn. So we'll go ahead and end that. And the vampire is going to move over here closer to this mechanism. So that's going to trigger it essentially. So I'm going to hit the alt key, bring that over here. And he's going to basically do a dodge. So instead of an attack this round, I can go up to the modifiers up here and look at the effects, and there is a dodge effect on here. So I can drag and drop that onto the vampire. So dodge will help in this situation to get him, to keep him from, getting hit, and that'll help. So I can use an effect as dodge, or I can create one. I don't see that on here, which is really amazing. But so I'm going to edit the list and go into here and just type the keyword dodge. And that's an effect. So what I'll do now is I'll drag and drop that onto the vampire. So drag this dodge onto him. That puts the effect on him, and it only lasts for 1 round. And now pass his turn. So he's going to basically focus on dodging. Okay, so the werewolf sees the opportunity. He runs in and he tries to attack him with his claws and his bite again. So he's going to do 2 claw attacks this time. So the first attack goes through, and it's at disadvantage, but he still managed to hit. So that's amazing. So the dodge didn't help the vampire one bit. But let's go ahead and roll for damage. So it does necrotic damage and piercing damage, so it's pretty gnarly. So the vampire partially resisted. It did light damage, despite it was 31 hit points of damage. And now the saving throw to see if he was going to be knocked prone, essentially, or pulled down to the ground. And he succeeded, so that doesn't, or he's not cursed in this case. And now for the claws. So we'll do the claw attack. Oh, actually, he's going to do a claw attack. He can only do 1 bite. So I'll go ahead and do this and roll. And again, that's a miss because he still has the dodge effect. When I advance the turn, the dodge effect is going to expire. And now the vampire has to make a choice. What I think he wants to do is get to the point where this werewolf is going to get close to the blades. So what I think he'll do is I will do, I think, a grapple. Maybe he's going to try to grapple him. So maybe we'll do a strength check versus strength check. They're both very strong. So let me roll a strength check for the vampire. So he's going to grab on or grapple. He's close enough. You could do an attack roll to see if he's able to grab him. You can do it however you want. They're close. They're locked up. So I'm not too worried about the attack roll part of it. But you can do it that way. Like just do a basic. We'll do a claw attack just to see if he actually lands his hands on him. So we'll do an unarmed strike, but then we'll do a strength check to see if he can grapple him. And So we'll go ahead and do that unarmed strike just to grab him. And he's able to get a hold of him, but instead of rendering his claws and such, he's going to grapple him and try to, basically get a hold of him. So we'll do a strength check on grappling. So if you're not sure how grappling works, you can always look it up in your player's handbook and that sort of thing. But the way I'm going to handle it is just do like contested strength checks, essentially, or perhaps other checks. So I'll go ahead and grab a... we'll see to resist that grapple or to break it, we'll have to break the strength check. So I'm going to take the vampire letter C and click on that, and that's going to basically do a strength roll, which is 7. That's going to suck. So that's going to be a very weak hold. So they'll pass his turn, and now this guy is going to try to break the hold. So again, he'll do a contested strength check. And yeah, that was very easy strength check to get. So he breaks the hold on that, and he basically he was able to break the hold. That's basically his action. But I could give him like maybe one action if you wanted to, but he's going to do a legendary action. So in this case, he gets this will cost him 2, but it's a very deadly move. So he can move up to his speed without provoking opportunity attacks, and it can make 1 claw attack in either form against each creature it moves past. So he's going to use that. So he's got his legendary pounce, and he's going to do another claw attack, and that should take care of him, or at least get this going, this action. So drag this over, and that hit, and he's actually over here now instead of over here, and going to actually do the damage. Drag that over, and that is a 9. So that's really light damage comparison. But then there's a strength check thing for losing his balance and basically becoming prone. So he failed this time. So now we're going to apply the prone effect. So now the werewolf has the vampire at a disadvantage. So the vampire is now prone on the ground. So I drug the prone effect onto the vampire. So that's basically the end of the werewolf's turn. So now I'm going to go and do this next actor. So now he has to get up, so he loses half of his movement rate. So he knows he's kind of messed up for that. And he does still have his legendary action, so I might use that in this case. So he's going to go, he's pissed off or angry about what happened to him, so he's going to basically struggle and pull himself up. He only has half his movement rate, so it's not going to do much to have him basically, to do much other than to move. So what I'm going to have him do is I'm going to have him move diagonally 5 feet, and he's going to shove the werewolf into the blades. That's basically his attack. So I'm going to do an unarmed strike to see if that hits, and I have to also make sure I remove the prone. If I don't, it will be at disadvantage. So I need to go to the effects and remove the prone effect, because he did stand up. He moved 5 feet, so he's still within reason. And I'm going to make a strike on him. But essentially, he's going to try to shove the werewolf into the blades. So I'm going to take this and do this attack roll here. So he missed. So he tried to shove the werewolf into the blades. The werewolf kind of turned aside and rolled with it. And the vampire is going to be the one that's going to be in trouble here. So he tried to shove. The werewolf tried to basically dodge out of the way. So I'm going to make a ruling here. Unless the vampire wants to I'll have him make a dexterity save. And if that works out, then I'll just play as it is. So vampire shoved. He missed. He'll have to make a save on his turn. So he can still try to avoid falling into the trap himself. So I'll go ahead and have him roll a dexterity save or a check. So I'll go ahead and I'll say it's a 15 or higher. Bring up his stat block. Go ahead and roll this check here. Wow. So he falls into the blades. Oh my God. So now that that's happened, now I get to deal with that. So there's rotating blades. It activates Okay, so he knew that was there. And now you can try to disable it, but he doesn't have any more turns left. So here's the slicing strike. So it gets at least 2 of these. So it has a +8 on attack. So here's 1 attack. I'd say he hopped over the blade at that point, or he kind of rolled around and it missed him. Now the other part of the blade comes around this round, and it's going to attack him, essentially. This time it connects, so he wasn't able to dodge the second one. It was a little too fast. So now I'm going to drag and drop the damage on him. Ooh, so it did light damage, but it still did 17 points of damage. So these are just kind of the things that you might run into when you're running an encounter. And you can use this stuff to kind of make things more interesting. Like for instance, these sounds might be something you want to use to make the game more interesting. And it is kind of manual somewhat, but at the same time, depending on how you have the trigger set up, it can do all kinds of different things depending on what the situation is. Generally, when you do a claw attack, and then you follow through with like a slashing attack, it will make a kind of a slashing sound, but I don't have the volume up loud enough, so let me turn that up. Okay, I'll do that again. So I'll do the damage for the slashing. Yeah, that didn't sound like a slash, but that's basically how they have it. So anyways, so this is just a kind of to show you what steps it took to get to this point. And this would resolve. So once I've got the vampire, he can still move. He's got, let's see, he moved 5 feet. He took an action, and now I'm going to move him out of the way of the blades. That's pretty much as far as he can move, according to being prone. So that would be his turn. So there we do I think he's out of legendary actions too, if I remember right. So now the Loup Garou or the Werewolf go. So this is just a back and forth exchange battle, but I wanted to show you some of the dynamics involved. I may not have actually did the combat 100% correct, and that's something you're going to have to live with as you get familiar with Fantasy Grounds. You might make mistakes, but just kind of move on. Don't let that one little mistake like bother you or ruin the whole game. It's not the end of the world. I think I handled it okay. I mean, maybe some of the stuff I did wasn't quite right, but it kind of gave you this scenario where they're locked in battle, and then the vampire try to throw the werewolf or push the werewolf into the blades, and the werewolf kind of he avoided it, and then the vampire went forward with his momentum, and he failed his dexterity check or save, and he fell into the blade. So, I mean, that's a really cool cinematic battle right there. And you watched it. If you went replay this back, they started running around the arena. They locked up over here. Then he ran over here, and now it's kind of the battle centered around this hazard. So kind of glad to have this here because it adds another dimension. It can be more complex, but I think it was a lot of fun. But basically, all of that work for this. This would be something you might do during a campaign, or something that you might set up for homebrew. A lot of times, half of this stuff is set up for you in Fantasy Grounds. So if you already have a module, the maps will already be set up. You don't have to go through and put in all that line of sight and such. And then all the tokens would be made. So we did that in the last episode. And then the arena would have already had the line of sight and everything all set. So you wouldn't have to do a majority of the work that I put into this. So all that work for this little itty bitty battle. So this is the kind of thing also that you want to think about when you are creating content for Fantasy Grounds. Is it really worth all that effort and work? And that's something you'll have to learn. Like I've done maps where I've spent 2 hours on it and used it for like 5 minutes. So that's something you have to think about in terms of how much effort you want to put into it, and is it really worth it? And is it a commercial product, or are you just using this for your friends around the table? So if you're really trying to impress somebody and you are doing a live stream and you got a sponsor and all that stuff, maybe go through all that. But when it comes down to actually just playing and having fun on a Sunday afternoon, you may not need all this stuff. So really kind of weigh what's worth it to you, and also what are you trying to show in your story. And I think this kind of illustrated the the vampire fighting with the werewolf. That kind of makes that exciting. I added some images prepared here. So this is an artwork that I made with ChatGPT, but I can show this during the combat at some point, and maybe I would change the background. Of course, it'd be an arena, but this would be something that you might show your players during the combat, and you can link this image. So if this was actually part of your campaign, you can link the image here and have that at the ready, and then take this and size it to where you want it, what size you want it to be. And then when you get ready to share this image, you can right click on it, go to sharing, and you share the record, and it will pop up on their side, provided they don't have something blocking it. And then after that, when you're done, you can close this, and you still have the link if you need to bring it back up. And when you're done with this encounter, you can actually unshare that image, because you're not going to need it after this in most cases. So if I go to images, now I can see this little letter P, which is public. That means it's shared with the group. So if I click on that, that unshares it, and everyone's, they don't need that picture anymore. So that might be something you do as your campaign progresses. So same thing with this map. When we're done with it, I can unshare the map, and it will essentially get rid of it. You can also click down here for a filter to see what you're sharing. So if I click on that, it will show anything that I'm sharing. So I don't have the map shared, which doesn't make sense, but I'll go ahead and share it. And then when I go back to the images, now it shows the map is shared with the player. So I'll go ahead and uncheck that when I'm done using the map. So this helps keep the campaign clean and keeps it from getting cluttered, and also from sharing too much stuff at once. Because as your campaign grows, you kind of have to manage it as you go. So again, we kind of, in the first video, we went through the setup, making the tokens, getting the line of sight on the map. Behind the scenes, I added this animated asset and this dust, and I made the NPC construct for this trap or this hazard. And I did all that in ChatGPT, and then I went and set up my Sirenscape so that it can play. And then you do that in Fantasy Grounds too. You make sure you logged into the website. You go into Fantasy Grounds, into the context sound menu, or in the settings up here, and then you have to set it up in the settings part. You got to make sure that you have the authorization, you import, then you generate your control panel, and then you generate the invite for your players. The players have to have a browser, and they have to open the browser to be able to hear the sounds, but it will pop up on their side if they allow that connection. So that's something that you'll do at the beginning, and hopefully you don't have to keep doing it over and over and over. But nonetheless, once in a while, you do have to refresh it. And then these context sounds will change as things change during the action. So if I delete, let's go to menu, go to delete from tracker. I'm going to delete all these individuals, and that also clears the sound context menu, because we're no longer dealing with those particular NPCs. So that's what happens with the context menu. So if I open up this NPC record, it's going to open up the sound context for that creature. So that's how those work. So it's based off this title, I believe, and a string of numbers. So when you go to the actual sound sets, and then you go up here, and let's go Werewolf. Let's just see what they have set up for that. So Werewolf. So here's general for a chapter in the Curse of Strahd. So that's set up for the Wolf's Den. But then there's the NPC settings. So here are all the unique NPC things. So you got barks, howls, and these are the things that are showing up in the context menu. So it's the type is content. The subtype is an NPC. So that's why it comes up in the context menu. So that's how these are set up. And someone went in there and did all those for you for the monster manual part of it. And then if you have the Curse of Strahd adventure, when you approach the den for the Fantasy Grounds module part, you would play that mood. So if you go into the Curse of Strahd, chapter 15, let's take a look at that. So if I go to modules, Go to Curse of Strahd, and then I'm going to go to the reference manual, which is the actual book, and then go down here to chapter 15. Here's the werewolf den. Okay, so I'm going to close this, but now that I have this up, this is the context menu part, and when you get close to the den, this is when it'll happen. So when you bring this up, the werewolf den, it's going to change the context menu according to what you've activated or what you've engaged with. So if I go to my story notes and I bring up the context menu for sound, and I go into this den here, here's the location. Okay, this is the location on the actual map. That brings up all of the context menu that are associated with that encounter. So you have this chatter sound effect, and then you have werewolf howls that you might be using, and then you have the encounter mood music that you might be using for this encounter. So that might be something that you want to do. So what I would like to do, what I would like to see in these adventures, is that this link would be embedded in the actual encounter. So instead of relying on that context menu to come up, I would like this to be embedded into the story elements itself. So if I open this up, unlock it, and hit enter, I can actually link that context menu in here under the sound set. So if I bring this up for chapter 15 for the wolf den, when you actually get into the the location, this is Werewolf in the Mists. I wanted the den. So quest, find the den. Okay, that's that. But then you can link this, if you want to, into the actual encounter. So when you approach the den, maybe you would want that to activate or have it handy. So that could be something that you would link in here if you wanted to. So it depends on the context of what's going on. Let's see what we got here. So welcome to Barovia. So that's just that. Let's bring up the actual... Okay, here's the wolf den. Okay, so you can unlock it, and then if you wanted to, you can actually take this mood thing and link it here. So now you have sound set that's linked to this chapter. So that would be what I would do as a GM, and that way for my prep, I would set that there. That way, if for example you don't, let's say you don't have that open, the sound context menu, you open this up, you have it right there. Or, better yet, if this was a location on this particular map, you can also link this on the map. And then you would bring this up and then trigger it. So there's lots of different ways that you can handle these things. But this is just to kind of add more immersion and a little bit more convenience when you're playing. So you don't have to do that, but that is something that how I would handle it if I was going to run this. So this is just some things that you will see or go through when you're playing with Fantasy Grounds, and then you're also adding audio and other elements like adding the maps and the tokens. It's quite a bit of work. So I wanted to be honest with you about that. That's not a simple thing that you're just going to do in one night. You got to get kind of competent with the platform and learn its limitations of what it can and can't do. And then you'll get better at it. It'll get easier as you use the program. So anyways, you guys, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. You can take care. And if you want to watch video 1 to the setup, will be in the link. And happy gaming.